Hey guys, it's Pete. This is my run through of your chapter one, kind of questions and comments, and I just kind of pick some out from the discussion forum that caught my eye or that multiple people had or whatever it might be. After I do this, I'm going to put up some assignments for the next week to work on, and I'll try and always keep you up to date as to what you need to be getting done in a certain week. It sometimes gets a little bit tricky because we have, I hate making things due on like a Friday, or I hate making things even just due on a Sunday. So sometimes the due dates kind of go into the next week. So technically this week you should already be reading, chapter 2 of the text. So the one thing you can do is just always keep up on the reading as you're supposed to. Read the chapter of the book that corresponds with the week that we're on, and sometime during the week, it might not always be Monday morning, but I'll put up an assignment and be ready to discuss the reading in the forums at some point during that week. So here's some stuff from chapter 1 I just thought I'd talk about. Anything I talk about in these videos is always fair game to put up on any quizzes or tests that we may have, and I'm just trying to give you a little more context to some of the questions that people had. We had a lot of people ask about, kind of like anxiety and fear when communicating. We had a lot of people ask about communication apprehension. Why do we get so nervous about communication? We all communicate, we all talk to one another all the time. Why do people get so nervous? Why do people have a fear communicating with other cultures? So in terms of fear and anxiety and communication apprehension, I just wanted to say a few things there. First of all, I think we, clearly fear and anxiety. I don't know why it does that. Fear and anxiety are contextual. Like, the context matters. There's situations that all of us feel very confident in, that all of us feel very competent in, and there may be other situations where we feel less competent, less comfortable. We tend to be, more nervous when there's higher uncertainty. And you can clearly see how this plays into intercultural communication first and foremost. Intercultural interactions are ones that carry higher amounts of uncertainty, that carry higher amounts of risk from some of our perspectives, especially if you go in worrying about, I'm going to offend someone, or I'm going to say the wrong thing, or they won't be able to understand me. There's higher uncertainty and more risk to those, anticipated risk to those interactions. Therefore, a lot of us, it just goes back to like your basic conflict resolution models, where many of us, when there's a conflict that comes up, the way we handle it, at least primarily, is to just try and avoid it, right? We just try to avoid the conflict and we get out of the bad situation, or we don't necessarily all take the path of direct aggression, right, where we're just confronting the person to their face and creating a bigger deal of it. So when you take that from an intercultural perspective, if that's your style of dealing with uncertain and uncomfortable situations, most of us who have that style are just going to avoid intercultural interactions, which is really a shame when you think about it. But obviously, fear and anxiety doesn't just come from intercultural interactions. It can come from any interaction in which we have a higher degree of uncertainty, or that there's more at stake, or we have more of our own self-image at stake, which is like the public speaking aspect of it. Communication apprehension is a little bit different than that. This tends to be something that's a little bit more inherent in the person. There's a certain percentage of the population that suffers from communication apprehension / you might call it, social anxiety as well. And I know this very well because, my wife has communication apprehension, which, is the ironic thing because I'm a communication professor. But communication apprehension is different because it carries through to a wide range of situations. While many of you may be nervous if you had to give a speech in front of a big group of people, someone with communication apprehension is going to be uncomfortable and nervous in a wide variety of situations. Anytime they're meeting someone new, anytime they're meeting, facing a situation where their self-image is at stake. Anytime where, another sign of communication apprehension is that you are very uncomfortable with like authority figures. So someone with communication apprehension and social anxiety will never just go to their professor's office after getting a bad grade on a test because it's just such a high-risk encounter in their mind. They would avoid that at all costs. So, like for my wife, when we were younger, getting spoken to by her boss at work was like a very uncomfortable situation where she couldn't even muster words to come out of her mouth because it was such a high anxiety, high stress situation. It's an authority figure telling you, engaged in some interaction with you. Now, if it's just us hanging out in our families and things like that, she, is a completely different person. But for whatever reason, in those specific situations, with a teacher or some sort of authority figure, it would just create this really high level of anxiety and fear in her. And that's how communication apprehension is a little bit different than just like your contextual situations where you maybe got nervous because of something specific that's happening in the situation. Let's see. What other ethical issues do we need to be aware of when participating cross-culturally? One thing I wanted to point out here was the difference between cross-cultural communication and intercultural communication. Some schools have classes similar to what you're taking called cross-cultural communication, and we're in a class called intercultural, and here's the difference. Cross-cultural communication refers to a snapshot of what communication is like between two cultures. So whatever cultures you want to take that to be, it could be, French and American, right? Or it could be Jewish and Buddhist, or whatever cultures it might be. Cross-cultural communication would focus on the study of what it would be like, what would cause misunderstandings, what conflicts may be present. The key is that it's descriptive. It's descriptive in nature. It's descriptive by describing, when people of these cultures get together, this is what it tends to be like. So maybe I've even misphrased that. Maybe not what would cause misunderstandings, but what has caused misunderstandings. What conflicts have occurred. I did not spell that right. What conflicts have occurred. It's historical, it's descriptive. This is what communication looks like between those cultures based on the experience and knowledge we have. Now we're taking intercultural communication, and this is much more predictive and explanatory. We are looking at the factors underlying communication between cultures, and we're looking to predict and explain things related to the key issues relating to communication between cultures. We're looking to be able to predict and explain conflict. There's a key difference there. Those who can describe conflict do not necessarily have the information available to predict and explain conflict. And to truly solve conflict, I would argue that you need to be able to predict and explain why it's happening, as opposed to just saying, hey, these two people got really mad at each other, and they're describing it. So intercultural communication is more focused on a dynamic approach. Dynamic meaning ever-changing. When we're involved in a conversation, the way, let's say, the tone of voice I speak to you is going to influence how you respond to me. If I'm really courteous or if I'm really sharp and abrupt with you, no matter which path I take, that's going to influence how you respond to me. Communication is dynamic. The way in which I say something influences how you say something to me, and then how you respond to me influences how I respond to you. Intercultural is looking at a very dynamic approach to communication, and is looking to predict and explain key underlying factors, oftentimes conflict, not always conflict, but key underlying issues to communication between cultures. We're looking to create efficiency in communication as well, so that we can minimize conflict and maximize efficiency when communicating with people that are have a different background than us. So that's what I would say is kind of the key thing to keep in mind there. I thought Jordan brought up a really interesting question, and it's one, I don't have a perfect answer to. But if we're thinking about, being, we hear the words, being tolerant all the time, right? Being tolerant of other cultures. And to be honest, Jordan, I don't know if this is exactly even what you meant with your question, but this is what I took it to mean, and I think it's an interesting point for discussion. Where do we draw the line between what we're comfortable with and what's simply wrong? So at what point do we stop being tolerant? At what point do we stop being tolerant of another culture because we believe something within that culture is truly wrong? And I don't have an answer to this question. If you read chapter 1, they talk about, the concept of like the dowry in India and how, in the past, and I don't know, I'm not well versed enough politically to understand what's going on in India, but at some point in that culture, there have been women burned to death, and the book goes into this practice, and clearly that is corrupt and awful and horrifying, and that is just purely wrong. But when in another culture where do we draw that line between saying, that's your culture, that's not mine, that's your decision, whatever, we each have our own cultures, that's cool, and where do we draw the line between that and saying, you know what, that is horrible that your culture practices that your culture, because now we're getting into stuff of questioning people's beliefs on things, and which opens us up to have our beliefs questioned. I just thought that was a really interesting question that I think I might bring up in the forums this week as part of a response activity. Finally, Colin brought up the fact that, hey, I didn't know what I thought about towns taking different official languages in the United States, which is true. There's places in Texas where there are far more Hispanic people than any other type, and the official language is Spanish. Would it be most optimal for English to be a core value of U.S. culture? I'm beginning to think maybe it doesn't have to be, but I will have to think more about that. What do you think? This is a big, deep question as well. I'd be interested to see people's thoughts about that. I would say that English is still a core value of U.S. culture, if you're phrasing it like that. Clearly, U.S. is a core value of our culture, and that's not changing anytime soon. Now, does it have to be the only language that's valued in our country? If you look at the history of the country and the idea of the melting pot and bringing in people from all over the place, then you get into questions of, how important is assimilation, or how important is, is it just the U.S.'s job to mold itself around whoever chooses to live here? And, is that what the American values are? Is just everyone's welcome here. This is the land of opportunity, the land of freedom, and you come here and you're free to practice whatever religion you want, and you're free to speak whatever language you want, and whoever lives here, we'll just kind of mold our values around you. It's kind of assimilation versus that, right? Or are people expected to come here and you need to learn this language, and you have to learn what our value systems are and what is traditional among the majority of people in this country? I mean, how important is that? And I think that brings up a really interesting question that could lend itself to further debate. So I'm going to stop myself here. I hope to have talked about some things that were brought up by you people this week that hopefully you found somewhat interesting or helpful or engaging in some way, and raise some questions for you to think about as well. I hope to do this weekly. I may not always have the time to do so, but I hope to do this especially when there's good questions that you guys are asking in your discussion activities. So keep working on the stuff for Chapter 2, and I'll be in touch soon with more stuff for you to work on for this class. Thanks.